The sun was just beginning to rise over the small town, painting the sky in soft shades of orange and pink. It was one of those mornings where everything felt calm, almost too calm. Birds chirped lazily from the trees, and the streets were still, empty except for an old man walking slowly down the sidewalk. His name was Elijah Jackson, but everyone around here simply called him the teacher. He had earned that title long ago when he spent 30 years teaching history at the local high school. Even though he had retired years back, people never stopped calling him by that name because, to them, it wasn't just a job. It was who he was. Elijah always started his day the same way, waking up early, drinking a cup of strong coffee, and heading out for a walk to the park. On this particular morning, like every other, he carried a worn-out book under his arm. It wasn't anything fancy, just an old copy of The Souls of Black Folk by W.E.B. Du Bois. He loved reading during his walks, finding peace in the words written decades ago yet somehow still relevant today. As he crossed the street near the park entrance, something unusual happened. A police car slowed down beside him, its tires crunching softly against the pavement. At first, Elijah didn't think much of it. Cops patrolled the area often enough, so seeing them wasn't strange. But then the window rolled down, and 2 officers leaned out. Their expressions weren't friendly. One of them squinted at Elijah through his sunglasses while the other tapped his pen impatiently against his notepad. "Hey, you," one of the officers barked, his tone sharp and demanding. "What are you doing out here?" Elijah paused mid-step, surprised by the question. He glanced around, wondering if there was some sort of misunderstanding. There wasn't anyone else nearby, just him, the quiet street, and the distant hum of birdsong. Still, he answered politely, as he always did. "I'm going for a walk," he said, his voice steady despite the sudden tension in the air. "Is there a problem?" Instead of responding kindly, the officer smirked. "A walk at this time? You sure you're not up to something?" His partner chimed in, laughing mockingly. "Yeah, maybe he's planning something sneaky. Look at him all alone with that book. What's in there, huh? Secrets?" Elijah tightened his grip on the book but kept his composure. He'd dealt with situations like this before, though they always left a bitter taste in his mouth. These kinds of interactions weren't new to him or to many others who looked like him in this town. He knew better than to argue or raise his voice. That usually made things worse. So instead, he stood quietly, waiting for whatever would come next. The officers exchanged glances, clearly unimpressed by his silence. One of them stepped out of the car, towering over Elijah even though he wasn't particularly tall himself. "You know," the officer said, leaning closer, "we don't need troublemakers wandering around our streets. Maybe we should check your ID, just to be safe." Elijah reached into his pocket without hesitation, pulling out his wallet. He handed over his identification, all while keeping his eyes fixed firmly ahead. Inside, though, he felt a deep sadness weighing on him. This wasn't how things were supposed to be. Not after all these years of trying to teach people about fairness, respect, and understanding. Yet here he was, being treated like a suspect simply because of the color of his skin. A few moments passed, and the officers flipped through his ID, muttering between themselves. They seemed determined to find fault with him, no matter how harmless he appeared. Finally, one of them tossed the card back toward Elijah, letting it fall onto the ground rather than handing it directly to him. "Pick it up," the officer snapped, "and don't let us catch you loitering around here again." Elijah bent down slowly, picking up his ID. He slipped it back into his wallet, careful not to show any sign of anger or frustration. As he straightened up, he noticed a small group of people gathering nearby. Some had stopped their cars at the intersection, while others stood on the sidewalk, watching what was happening. A few shook their heads in disbelief while others whispered nervously to each other. One young boy couldn't stay silent any longer. He pushed through the crowd, his face flushed with emotion. "Leave him alone," he shouted, pointing accusingly at the officers. "He hasn't done anything wrong." The officers turned their attention to the boy, scowling. "Stay out of this, kid," one of them growled. "This doesn't concern you." But the boy refused to back down. "Yes, it does. He's my teacher. He Taught me everything I know. Why are you treating him like this? For a moment, the entire scene froze. The officers looked stunned, unsure how to respond to such boldness. Elijah placed a gentle hand on the boy's shoulder, silently urging him to step back. He appreciated the gesture, but he didn't want anyone else getting caught up in this mess. Just as the situation threatened to spiral further out of control, another voice rang out, one that immediately commanded respect. "What's going on here?" it demanded, cutting through the tension like a knife. Everyone turned to see the source of the voice, and what followed would change the course of the morning forever. The voice that broke through the tension belonged to someone everyone in the town knew well. It was Chief Amelia Hart, the head of the police department. She wasn't just any leader. She was known for her fairness and her strong sense of right and wrong. People respected her because she didn't play favorites, and she always stood up for what was just. When she arrived on the scene, it was clear that things were about to change. Chief Hart stepped out of her car with authority, her boots clicking sharply against the pavement. Her eyes scanned the situation quickly, taking in every detail. The nervous boy standing beside Elijah, the angry expressions on the two officers' faces, and the growing crowd of onlookers. The atmosphere was thick with unease, but Chief Hart didn't flinch. Instead, she walked straight toward the group, her presence commanding attention. "What's going on here?" she repeated, her tone firm but calm. She looked directly at the two officers, waiting for an explanation. One of them stammered, trying to explain why they had stopped Elijah. "We were just checking IDs, making sure everything's in order," he said, his voice wavering slightly under her gaze. But Chief Hart wasn't convinced. She could tell there was more to the story. Before the officers could say anything else, Chief Hart turned her attention to Elijah. "Sir," she said gently, "are you all right? Is there a reason these officers are bothering you?" Her tone was warm, filled with genuine concern. Elijah nodded slowly, still holding on to his book. "I'm fine," he replied quietly. "I was just taking my usual walk when they stopped me." Chief Hart frowned, clearly unhappy with what she was hearing. Then, as if something clicked in her mind, she looked at Elijah more closely. Her expression softened and a small smile spread across her face. "Wait a minute," she said, her voice full of recognition. "You're Mr. Jackson, aren't you? The history teacher?" Elijah blinked in surprise. He hadn't expected anyone in uniform to recognize him, let alone the police chief herself. "Yes, that's me," he admitted, his voice tinged with humility. Chief Hart's smile widened. "Of course I remember you. You taught me in high school. You were one of the best teachers I ever had." She paused, glancing at the officers who now looked visibly uncomfortable. "Do you know who this man is?" she asked them, her tone sharper this time. The officers exchanged uneasy glances. They clearly had no idea who Elijah was, and their ignorance showed on their faces. One of them muttered something under his breath, but Chief Hart cut him off before he could finish. "This man," she said firmly, pointing at Elijah, "has shaped the lives of countless people in this town, including mine. He's dedicated his life to teaching young people about justice, equality, and respect. And yet, here you are, treating him like a criminal." Her words hung heavy in the air. The officers shifted uncomfortably, their earlier bravado fading fast. Chief Hart wasn't done yet. She turned back to the crowd, addressing them directly. "Does anyone here believe this man deserves to be treated this way?" she asked, her voice ringing out loud and clear. The crowd murmured in agreement, shaking their heads. Some even clapped, showing their support for Elijah. The young boy who had spoken up earlier stepped forward again, emboldened by Chief Hart's arrival. "He's telling the truth," he exclaimed. "Mr. Jackson is a good person. He's helped so many of us. Why are you picking on him?" His words resonated with the crowd, and a few people began to cheer. Chief Hart nodded approvingly at the boy. "Thank you for speaking up," she told him. Then, turning back to the officers, she added, "You've made a serious mistake here. Not only have you disrespected a valued member of our community, but you've also embarrassed yourselves in this department. I expect better from my team." The officers mumbled apologies, though their words sounded hollow. Chief Hart didn't seem satisfied. She ordered them to return to the station immediately, promising that their actions would be reviewed thoroughly. As they slunk back to their patrol car, the crowd erupted into applause, cheering for Chief Hart and Elijah. Once the officers were gone, Chief Hart turned her focus back to Elijah. "I'm so sorry this happened to you," she said sincerely. "You didn't deserve any of it." Elijah gave her a small, grateful smile. "Thank you for stepping in," he replied. "It means a lot." Chief Hart gestured toward a nearby bench. "Let's sit for a moment," she suggested. "I want to hear how you're doing." As they walked over, the crowd began to disperse, though some lingered nearby, unwilling to leave just yet. They wanted to make sure Elijah was okay, and they wanted to show their support. Once they were seated, Chief Hart leaned in closer, her expression thoughtful. "You've done so much for this town," she said. "And not just as a teacher. You've been a role model for all of us. Your patience, your wisdom, it's inspired so many people, myself included." She paused, then added, "Including those two officers, whether they realize it or not." Elijah chuckled softly, though there was a hint of sadness in his laugh. "It's hard to teach someone who doesn't want to learn," he said, his voice quiet but meaningful. Chief Hart nodded in understanding. "You're right," she agreed. "But that doesn't mean we stop trying. We owe it to ourselves and to each other to keep pushing for change." As they talked, the young boy who had defended Elijah approached them hesitantly. "Excuse me," he said shyly, looking at Elijah. "I just wanted to say thank you for everything you've done for us." Elijah smiled warmly at him. "You don't have to thank me," he replied. "Just promise me you'll keep standing up for what's right, even when it's hard." The boy nodded eagerly. "I will," he promised. With that, he ran off, leaving Elijah and Chief Hart alone once more. The morning sun was higher in the sky now, casting golden light over the park. Despite everything that had happened, there was a sense of hope in the air, a feeling that maybe, just maybe, things could get better. As the morning sun continued to rise, Chief Hart and Elijah sat together on the bench, their conversation flowing easily despite the heaviness of the situation. The young boy's heartfelt words still lingered in the air, a reminder of how much Elijah had touched the lives of those around him. Chief Hart leaned back slightly, her arms crossed as she reflected on what had just unfolded. "You know," she said thoughtfully, glancing at Elijah, "this isn't the first time I've seen something like this happen, but it never gets easier to witness." Her voice carried a mix of frustration and sadness, emotions that Elijah understood all too well. He nodded slowly, his eyes fixed on the ground. "It's not about me," he replied softly. "It's about what it says about where we are as a community, and how far we still have to go." Chief Hart sighed deeply, rubbing her temples as if trying to ease away the weight of responsibility she carried. "You're right," she admitted. "And it starts with accountability. Those two officers, they're going to face consequences for their actions today. I won't tolerate behavior like that under my watch." She paused, then added firmly, "But that's only part of the solution. We need to do more than punish bad behavior. We need to change the mindset behind it." Elijah looked up at her, his expression thoughtful. "That's always been the challenge, hasn't it?" he said. "Changing minds is harder than changing rules. People cling to what they know, even when it hurts others or themselves." He let out a small chuckle, though there was no humor in it. "I spent 30 years teaching history, hoping to show students that our past shapes our present but doesn't have to define our future. Sometimes it feels like I barely scratched the surface." Chief Hart placed a reassuring hand on his shoulder. "Don't sell yourself short," she said earnestly. "You've planted seeds in so many people, seeds of understanding, empathy, and courage. Some of them take longer to grow than others, but they're there. And when they bloom, they make a difference." She smiled warmly at him. "Take me, for example. Everything I learned from you about fairness and leadership has stayed with me throughout my career. You might not see it every day, but your influence is everywhere." Elijah's eyes softened, touched by her words. "Thank you," he said simply. "That means more than you know." For a moment, neither of them spoke. The park was quiet now, save for the distant rustle of leaves and the occasional chirp of birds. It was peaceful, a stark contrast to the tension that had filled the air just moments ago. After a while, Chief Hart stood up, brushing off her uniform. "Come on," she said, offering Elijah a hand. "Let's get you home. This has been a long enough morning for you." Elijah hesitated briefly before accepting her help. As they walked side by side, the crowd that had gathered earlier began to thin out, though a few people lingered, watching curiously. One woman approached them timidly, holding out a thermos. "Excuse me, Mr. Jackson," she said shyly. "I made some tea. I thought, maybe you'd like some?" Her voice trailed off, unsure if she was overstepping, but Elijah smiled kindly at her, accepting the thermos with gratitude. "That's very kind of you," he said. "Thank you." The gesture seemed to break the ice, encouraging others to step forward as well. A man offered to carry Elijah's book for him, while another handed him a bottle of water. Each act of kindness was small, but together they created a ripple effect, a quiet rebellion against the ugliness that had marred the morning. Elijah felt a lump form in his throat as he realized just how much these simple acts meant to him. "Chief." Hart noticed the emotional impact on Elijah and gently guided him toward her car. "Let's give you a ride home," she insisted. "You've been through enough already." Elijah didn't argue this time. He climbed into the passenger seat, clutching the thermos of tea tightly in his hands. As Chief Hart started the engine, she glanced at him. "We'll talk more later, okay? About what happened and what comes next. For now, just rest." The drive to Elijah's house was short, but filled with comfortable silence. When they arrived, Chief Hart helped him out of the car and walked him to the door. Before saying goodbye, she gave him one last reassuring smile. "You're stronger than you think," she said, "and you're not alone. We'll figure this out together." Once inside, Elijah sank into his favorite armchair, feeling both drained and strangely uplifted. The events of the morning replayed. In his mind, the harsh words from the officers, the boys' brave defense, Chief Hart's unwavering support, and the kindness of strangers who had stepped forward when it mattered most. It was a lot to process, but one thing was clear. The day hadn't ended the way it had begun. Later that afternoon, word of what had happened spread quickly through the town. Neighbors knocked on Elijah's door, bringing food or simply stopping by to check on him. Some shared stories of their own experiences with prejudice, while others expressed outrage at the officer's behavior. By evening, Elijah's living room was filled with people, friends, former students, and acquaintances, all united by a shared desire to stand with him. One older woman, a retired librarian, held up a photo album she had brought with her. "Do you remember this?" she asked, flipping through the pages until she found a picture of Elijah standing in front of a classroom, surrounded by smiling teenagers. "This was my daughter's class," she explained. "She used to come home talking about how much she admired you, how you taught her to believe in herself and fight for what's right." Elijah studied the photo, memories flooding back. "Yes, I remember her," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "She was such a bright student, always asking questions, always eager to learn." The woman nodded, tears glistening in her eyes. "She's a lawyer now, thanks to you. She says you inspired her to pursue justice." As the night wore on, more stories poured in, each one a testament to the lasting impact Elijah had made on the community. Though the morning had started with pain and humiliation, it had somehow transformed into something else entirely, a celebration of resilience, connection, and hope. And yet Elijah knew this was only the beginning. There was still work to be done, not just for him but for everyone who deserved to live in a world free of fear and prejudice. The next morning, Elijah woke up feeling a mix of emotions. The events of the previous day weighed heavily on his mind, but so did the outpouring of support from the community. He had spent hours talking to neighbors, friends, and former students who came to his house, sharing stories and offering comfort. It was heartwarming but also exhausting. As he sipped his coffee at the kitchen table, he couldn't help but think about what would happen next. Word of the incident had spread far. Beyond the town by now, someone had posted a video online showing parts of the confrontation with the officers, as well as Chief Hart stepping in to defend Elijah. Within hours, it went viral, sparking conversations not just locally, but across the country. People were outraged by the treatment Elijah had endured, praising Chief Hart for her leadership, while calling for accountability from the officers involved. News outlets picked up the story, framing it as an example of both systemic racism and the power of standing up against injustice. Elijah wasn't used to being in the spotlight like this. He had always preferred quiet moments, reading books, walking through the park, or teaching without seeking recognition. But now, there was no escaping the attention. Reporters began calling his home, asking if they could interview him. Some even showed up unannounced, knocking on his door with cameras in hand. At first, Elijah turned them all away, unsure how to respond. But eventually, Chief Hart convinced him that speaking out might be important, not just for himself, but for others facing similar struggles. "People need to hear your voice," she told him during a phone call early that morning. "You've been through something painful, but you've handled it with grace and dignity. That's powerful. Sharing your story could inspire change." Elijah hesitated, knowing she was right, but still feeling uneasy about becoming the center of attention. After a long pause, he agreed to meet with her later that day to discuss what to say. Meanwhile, the fallout for the two officers continued to unfold. Chief Hart wasted no time addressing their behavior. She suspended them pending a full investigation and ordered mandatory sensitivity training for the entire department. But she didn't stop there. During a press conference held at police headquarters, she spoke openly about the incident, acknowledging the harm caused and promising reforms within the department. "This is a wake-up call for all of us," she said, standing tall behind the podium. "We cannot claim to serve and protect if we are contributing to fear and division. What happened yesterday was unacceptable, not just because of how Mr. Jackson was treated, but because it reflects deeper issues that we must confront as a community." Her words resonated deeply, earning applause from those gathered outside the building. Back at Elijah's house, preparations were underway for the meeting with Chief Hart. A few close friends helped tidy up the living room, arranging chairs and setting out refreshments. Despite the seriousness of the situation, there was a sense of camaraderie in the air. Everyone wanted to support Elijah, ensuring he felt ready to face whatever came next. When Chief Hart arrived, she brought along a folder filled with notes and suggestions for how Elijah could approach the media. "Remember," she said as they sat down together, "this is your story. You don't have to share anything you're not comfortable with. But if you do decide to speak, focus on the bigger picture, on the lessons we can all learn from this moment." Elijah nodded thoughtfully, flipping through the pages she had prepared. One suggestion stood out to him: hosting a public event where people could come together to talk about race, respect, and reconciliation. It wouldn't just be about airing grievances. It would be about finding solutions, building bridges, and fostering understanding. The idea appealed to him immediately. "This feels right," he said, looking at Chief Hart. "If I'm going to use my voice, I want it to lead somewhere meaningful." By the end of the day, plans for the event were already taking shape. Local organizations offered to help organize it, spreading the word through social media and flyers. The library volunteered its space, and volunteers stepped forward to assist with logistics. Even the mayor reached out, expressing his support and pledging resources to make the gathering a success. As evening approached, Elijah found himself reflecting on everything that had happened. The past 24 hours had been overwhelming, filled with highs and lows. There were moments when he felt angry, hurt, and frustrated, but there were also moments of profound connection and hope. He realized that while the incident itself was painful, it had sparked something important: a chance for growth, healing, and unity. Sitting alone in his study, surrounded by books and papers, Elijah picked up a pen and began writing. He wrote about his experiences, his thoughts, and his dreams for the future. He poured his heart into every word, knowing that these reflections would guide him during the public event. For the first time in days, he felt a glimmer of peace. Whatever challenges lay ahead, he knew he wouldn't face them alone. Outside, the sun dipped below the horizon, casting a warm golden glow over the town. Neighbors greeted each other on sidewalks, children played in yards, and life carried on, as usual. But beneath the surface, something had shifted. Conversations were happening, in homes, schools, workplaces, that hadn't before. People were listening, learning, and beginning to see things differently. And at the center of it all was Elijah, a quiet man whose courage and wisdom reminded everyone of what truly mattered. The day of the public event arrived, and the town buzzed with anticipation. Flyers had been posted on every bulletin board, shared online, and handed out at schools, churches, and grocery stores. The library's large meeting room was prepared to accommodate as many people as possible, but even then, organizers weren't sure if it would be enough. Word had spread far beyond the town limits, drawing interest from neighboring communities and even reporters from nearby cities. Elijah woke up early that morning, feeling a mix of nerves and determination. He knew this wasn't just about him. It was about creating a space where people could come together to discuss difficult topics openly and honestly. Still, the weight of what he was about to do rested heavily on his shoulders. For decades, he had taught history, guiding students through lessons about justice, equality, and resilience. But today he would step into a different kind of classroom, one without walls or textbooks, but filled with real people facing real challenges. As he dressed in his favorite suit, a navy blue one he hadn't worn in years, he thought about all the conversations that had led him here. Conversations with Chief Hart, who reminded him that change starts with courage. Conversations with neighbors who shared their own stories of struggle and hope. And conversations with himself, late, at night when the house was quiet, wrestling with doubts and fears. By the time he tied his tie, he felt ready, or as ready as anyone could be for something like this. When Elijah arrived at the library, he was greeted by a flurry of activity. Volunteers bustled around, arranging chairs, setting up microphones, and laying out refreshments. Someone handed him a cup of tea, which he accepted gratefully. "You look amazing," one of the volunteers said, smiling warmly. "Everyone's excited to hear you speak." Elijah nodded, managing a small smile despite the butterflies swirling in his stomach. By the time the doors opened, a line had already formed outside. People of all ages, backgrounds, and walks of life streamed in, filling the room quickly. Some came because they wanted answers. Others came seeking understanding. A few admitted they were curious, unsure of what to expect, but willing to listen. Whatever their reasons, they shared a common goal: to be part of something bigger than themselves. Chief Hart was among the attendees, sitting near the front with a proud yet somber expression. She had played a key role in organizing the event, ensuring it remained focused on constructive dialogue rather than blame. As the room settled into silence, she stood up briefly to introduce Elijah. Her voice carried authority, but there was also warmth in her tone. "Many of you know Mr. Jackson as a teacher," she began, looking out at the crowd. "But to me, and to so many others, he's more than that. He's a mentor, a leader, and a beacon of hope. Today, we're not just here to hear his story, we're here to learn from it, to ask ourselves how we can do better, individually and collectively. So please join me in welcoming him." The applause was thunderous, lasting longer than Elijah expected. When it finally died down, he stepped up to the podium, adjusting the microphone slightly. For a moment, he simply stood there, taking in the sea of faces before him. There was a mix of emotions in the room: curiosity, apprehension, eagerness, and he felt the responsibility of addressing them all. "Thank you," he began, his voice steady but soft. "Thank you for being here today. I didn't plan for my life to bring me to this moment, but here we are, and I believe that means something." He paused, letting the words sink in. "What happened to me recently wasn't unique. It wasn't extraordinary. In fact, it happens far too often. To people who look like me, to people who don't fit certain expectations, to people who are seen as other. But instead of focusing solely on what went wrong, I want us to think about what can go right. He went on to share his experiences, not just from the incident with the officers, but from a lifetime of navigating a world that often made assumptions based on skin color. He spoke candidly about moments of frustration and pain, but also about the strength he found in community, education, and faith. His words were simple yet powerful, resonating deeply with everyone in the room. After his speech, the floor opened for discussion. At first, people hesitated, unsure of how to start. But soon hands began to rise and voices emerged, one after another, sharing their own stories, questions, and reflections. A young woman talked about growing up in a divided neighborhood and wanting to bridge gaps between communities. An older man confessed to holding prejudices he now regretted and asked how he could unlearn them. A teenager expressed frustration over feeling unheard and wondered how to make meaningful change. Elijah listened intently to each speaker, nodding and occasionally jotting notes. When it was his turn to respond, he did so with patience and wisdom. Change doesn't happen overnight, he said at one point. It takes effort, honesty, and sometimes uncomfortable conversations. But if we commit to listening, if we truly hear each other, we can move forward together. The event lasted hours, stretching well into the evening. By the end, there was a palpable shift in the atmosphere. People hugged, exchanged contact information, and promised to stay connected. Many lingered afterward, reluctant to leave the sense of unity they had found. Outside, the sun dipped lower in the sky, casting long shadows across the parking lot. But inside the library, light seemed to shine brighter than ever. For Elijah, the day was both exhausting and exhilarating. As he packed up his notes and prepared to head home, Chief Hart approached him once more. "You did good," she said, her eyes shining with pride. "Really good." Elijah smiled faintly, though his expression was tinged with humility. "We all did," he replied. "This isn't the work of one person. It's the work of everyone." On the drive home, Elijah reflected on everything that had transpired. The road ahead wouldn't be easy. Old habits die hard, and progress rarely moves in a straight line. But for the first time in a long while, he felt hopeful. Not because he believed the world would suddenly become perfect, but because he saw glimpses of possibility in the people around him. They were imperfect, flawed and human, but they were trying. And sometimes that was enough. In the weeks following the public event, the town began to change in subtle but noticeable ways. Conversations that had once been avoided were now happening openly, in homes, workplaces, and even at the local diner where people gathered for breakfast. The library became a hub of activity, hosting workshops and discussions on topics like racial bias, empathy, and community building. What started as a single evening of dialogue had grown into something much larger, a movement toward understanding and healing. Elijah found himself busier than ever. People stopped him on the street to thank him or share their thoughts about the event. Some asked for advice on how to have tough conversations with family members who held outdated views. Others invited him to speak at schools, churches, and community centers. Though he appreciated the invitations, Elijah was careful not to overextend himself. He knew that real change took time and patience, and he didn't want to burn out before seeing it through. One day, while walking through the park, the same place where everything had begun, he noticed something new. A group of volunteers had gathered near the entrance, planting trees and flowers. It was part of an initiative called Roots of Unity, inspired by the discussions from the public event. The goal was simple: beautify the park while fostering connections among residents. Young and old worked side by side, laughing and chatting as they dug holes and planted saplings. When one of the organizers spotted Elijah, she waved him over, enthusiastically. "We wanted you to see this," she said, beaming with pride. "It's our way of showing that growth starts small, but if we nurture it, it can become something beautiful." Elijah smiled, feeling a lump rise in his throat. The symbolism wasn't lost on him. Just like the seeds being planted in the soil, the seeds of change had been sown in the hearts of the townspeople. And though it would take time for those roots to deepen, the effort gave him hope. As the months passed, the ripple effects of the event continued to spread. Chief Hart implemented new training programs within the police department, focusing not just on sensitivity, but on active listening and conflict resolution. Officers were encouraged to engage with the community in positive ways, attending town hall meetings, volunteering at local events, and simply taking the time to get to know the people they served. While some officers embraced these changes wholeheartedly, others resisted at first. But over time, even the skeptics began to see the value in building trust, rather than fear. The two officers involved in the original incident faced consequences for their actions. One chose to leave the force altogether, unable to reconcile his behavior with the values expected of a public servant. The other stayed on, completing the required training and working hard to rebuild trust. Though progress was slow, he eventually earned back some respect from the community, not because he deserved forgiveness outright, but because he demonstrated genuine effort to improve. Meanwhile, Elijah's influence extended far beyond the town limits. The story of what had happened and how the community responded continued to resonate across the country. Articles were written, interviews aired, and social media posts shared widely. People admired not only Elijah's grace under pressure, but also the collective response of the town. It became a shining example of what could happen when individuals came together to confront injustice and work toward a better future. One afternoon, Elijah received a letter in the mail. It was from a teacher in another state who had followed the story closely. Enclosed was a photo of her classroom, where students had created a mural inspired by Elijah's message of resilience and unity. "Your courage has touched so many lives," she wrote, including mine. "Thank you for reminding us that even in difficult times there is always room for hope." Tears welled up in Elijah's eyes as he read the note. He hadn't expected such an impact, but it reinforced what he had always believed, that small actions done with care and intention could create waves of change. That evening, he pinned the letter to his bulletin board alongside other mementos, a reminder of why he kept going, even when things felt overwhelming. By the end of the year, the town decided to honor Elijah officially. They organized a ceremony in the park, inviting everyone to celebrate his contributions. On a crisp autumn morning, hundreds of people gathered beneath a canopy of colorful leaves. Children ran around playing tag, while adults chatted and laughed, enjoying the sense of togetherness that had grown stronger with each passing month. Chief Hart stood at the podium, her voice filled with emotion as she addressed the crowd. "Today, we're here to recognize someone who has shaped not just our town but our hearts," she said. "Mr. Elijah Jackson, a man whose wisdom, kindness, and determination remind us of what it means to stand for justice, not just in words, but in action." She then presented Elijah with a plaque declaring the day Elijah Jackson Day in honor of his lifelong dedication to education and equality. The applause was deafening, lasting several minutes as people cheered and whistled. Elijah stepped forward to accept the award, visibly moved by the gesture. When it was his turn to speak, he kept his words short but heartfelt. "I never set out to be a hero," he began, his voice trembling slightly. "I simply wanted to make a difference in whatever way I could. If my life has taught me anything, it's that none of us are alone. We all carry burdens, but we also carry strength, and when we share that strength, amazing things can happen." He paused, looking out at the sea of faces before him. "Thank you for standing with me. Let's keep moving forward, together." As the ceremony drew to a close, people lingered in the park, reluctant to say goodbye. Food trucks had set up nearby, offering hot chocolate and snacks while musicians played lively tunes on guitars and violins. Laughter echoed through the air, mingling with the sound of rustling leaves. For the first time in a long while, the town felt truly united, not because everyone agreed on everything, but because they were committed to learning from one another. That night, as Elijah sat in his favorite armchair with a cup of tea, he reflected on everything that had transpired. The journey hadn't been easy, and there were still challenges ahead. Racism, prejudice, and inequality wouldn't disappear overnight. They required constant vigilance and effort. But Elijah no longer felt weighed down by the weight of those issues. Instead, he felt empowered, knowing that he had sparked something meaningful. He picked up the book he had been reading the morning of the incident, the same worn-out copy of The Souls of Black Folk. Flipping through its pages, he smiled softly. The words inside had guided him through countless moments of doubt and uncertainty, reminding him of the resilience of the human spirit. As he closed the book and placed it gently on the table, he whispered to himself, "This is just the beginning." Outside, the stars twinkled brightly in the clear night sky. Somewhere in the distance, a dog barked, and the faint hum of crickets filled the air. Life carried on as usual, yet everything felt different. Hope had taken root in the hearts of the townspeople, nurtured by courage, compassion, and a shared commitment to a brighter future. And in that moment, Elijah knew that no matter what lay ahead, they would face it together.